Christ is risen.
Truly is risen. So Novorossiya, Odessa, and Kherson do have something in common, and it seems like the governor of Kherson really wants Odessa back. And, we spoke about this last week, Conrad, right? So we made the prediction, we said Odessa, most likely, based on the posters, militarily speaking as well, capturing Odessa for the Russian side will be a huge breakthrough. It'll really move this operation into its second stages. Ukraine will be definitely on the back foot, and not just that, but also world trade may be affected, seeming that all the ports of Ukraine, all the civil ports, the exports of grain, fertilizer, and other produce, they're always leaving at least the shores of the Odessa Oblast. So as soon as the Russians actually enter into that oblast and begin, appropriating territory legally or militarily speaking, there's going to be some big shifts in world powers and world affairs.
And if that really occurs and Odessa really does get taken, that's really the dominoes on World War III are going to start falling even faster, because think about it from all the lenses where we analyze this. Initially, Transnistria, Pridnestrovia, we talk about that all the time. That will basically be connected at that point. If Odessa, the city itself, and the whole surrounding oblast is taken, the connection with Transnistria will then have been made, giving now Russia a border with Moldova, who is, pushing harder and harder for EU membership than ever before, because they realize it's getting less and less likely for Ukraine as they lose territory, but it may get more and more likely for them as they have yet to have any territory, quote unquote, compromised. But I believe it is because of the whole Transnistria thing that they've never been eligible for EU membership and NATO membership, because of that ongoing border conflict that they, I guess, in theory, if Russia takes it, would be resolved. So maybe then they would immediately be fast-tracked in. But then, of course, we also think about Turkey and the Black Sea rivalry. I have a hard time seeing Turkey winning a confrontation with Russia on the Black Sea once Russia fully controls the entire, the Slavic coast of the Black Sea. I see that being a total victory. The Black Sea already has become Russia's lake. It'll only be more of that once Odessa has actually been taken. So this is big. And the other thing being, of course, Odessa being one of the most relevant cities for the 2014 Maidan, for the root of this ethnic civil war, this conflict between, Russians in the east and more Ukrainian identifying Slavs in the west of Ukraine. Some of there was the burning and the supposed crucifixion of these horrible atrocities that took place against ethnic Russians in Odessa, which served to fan the flames of this now. On episode 6 of Ether Hour, which we've just released, everyone should check that out, about Givi Motorola, the early stages of the Donbass War. This was one of those events that would have inspired these men to have taken up arms and defend their people against what they perceive as, genocidal aggression funded by, Western Satanism.
And of course, lest we forget, one of the major, when the actual conflict began in Donbass, like you just mentioned, Conrad, Odessa had that burning that took place, right, in 2014, right, which was probably, we'd want to call it an esoteric, human sacrifice, and Ukrainians themselves call it like a certain purging of Russianness, purging of the local Muscovites, which occurred in early 2014 in Odessa in the, I believe it was the House of the Unions, with, I think, several tens of people ended up dying in that fire, where they locked up the pro-Russian protesters in one of the major government buildings and essentially set the building on fire, and they had guns standing outside, essentially just a rabble, a politicized pro-Ukrainian rabble standing outside of guns, threatening that if these people leave the burning office, they're going to get shot. And people ended up burning up inside, and none of them were dignified of any funerals, and it was essentially like a huge scandal of sorts. Now, and remember, in the Aether Hour episode, which, for all the subscribers and supporters, you may have listened to it recently, where we discussed Stelkov, Givi, and Motorola, and some of the earlier days of the 2014 Donbass rebellion against Ukraine. There were a lot of actual so-called separatists or pro-Russian Ukrainians from Odessa who didn't like what they saw in Odessa, and the only way to properly resist this new Ukrainian Maidan reign, tyranny, and also Poroshenko, the new, falsely elected president of Ukraine, was to actually travel from Odessa, to leave their home city, go to Donbass, go to Donetsk and Lugansk, and actually serve over there in order to begin this sort of liberation of Ukraine from the east. So there's a lot of or at least 8 years ago, there were a lot of pro-Russian patriots, ethnically Ukrainian patriots who supported Russia, loved Orthodoxy, who wanted to fight against, say, this westernization of their homeland. They all traveled to Donetsk to fight on the front lines against the Ukrainian military. So this So Odessa is, despite what people say, it's a very it's in the west. It's in the west of Ukraine, so it must be pro-Ukrainian. Odessa typically is one of those cities which, at least 8 years ago, it was considered very pro-Russian. A lot of Russians went there for holidays. Naturally, it's right on in the coast of the Black Sea. Historically, a lot of Soviets went there as well for holidays, including famous Soviet bureaucrats, political leaders, Khrushchev, Brezhnev, etc. A lot of people, and some of my family members as well. People love to travel to Odessa, so Odessa is pretty well known. And it's a very pro-Russian city, similar to Kharkov. But of course, the landscape changes with time, as well as the kind of political prosecution, oppression that occurs in these regions does shift the sentiment. People become scared. The locals of Odessa, the city people, like notice Kherson. The people of Kherson managed to put up a resistance against the local Ukrainians, which is why Kherson fell to the Russian forces quite quickly in 2022. But what can be said about Odessa? The Ukrainians have been, buffering it up. The old governor of Odessa actually was a former member of the neo-Nazi Aidar battalion. Recently, Zelensky did force him to resign, but he did lead the Odessa Oblast for about 6 to 8 months. So Odessa was led by a literal, at least the Oblast of Odessa was led by a literal former neo-Nazi from the Aidar battalion. You can Google the Aidar battalion's former leaders. All this information is available online. So Odessa has been, the Ukrainians have been preparing it in some way, or at least the attitude of the locals to this possible coming Russian invasion, as they call it. And, it's technically a liberation, but they have been preparing the people of Odessa for this conflict since the earliest period. And Zelensky too has, I'm sure, all of the NATO chiefs of staff, involved, and all the people on the ground in Ukraine. They already have a forecasted potential invasion plan of Russia. They know how Russia will invade Odessa, where they'll strike. It's just when the ball falls into Russia's court, that's when the shooting will start. The shooting of the hoop, but not anybody or anything else. But until then, I think what's next is probably the Ukrainian counteroffensive, which we discussed for a few weeks now. But that's, I think, the next major event that will take place before we can speak about any sort of Black Sea fleet invasion of Odessa.
Well, that kind of raises the question of geography. We've talked about some of these different regions and why they've been liberated as fast as they have versus others, and the prospect of others then being liberated and at what speed. But of course, we've seen, compare the cities of Luhansk and Donetsk. Donetsk has been on the front line and had a strong artillery trench line of Ukrainians up against it for years now, always shelling, always there, despite them not making any actual progress really towards the city. Whereas Luhansk has been nestled well behind the front lines for a long time now, which is why it's been so much more peaceful. It has grown more in population compared to Donetsk, as people even from Donetsk have moved to Luhansk to be safer, but to still live in a relatively close region to where they, grew up in their homeland.